Alrighty, folks, let's get this Connect260 started. So hello, everyone. My name is Danielle. I am the Public Programs and Visitor Services Manager at the Morris-Jumel Mansion. And thank you for joining us tonight for a very special October spooky session of Connect260, focusing on the paranormal and American art. We're so happy to have you. We're so happy to feature this really fun and interesting aspect of the mansion's sort of depth for this month's Connect260 virtual session. And I'm really excited for y'all to see the presentation we have for you tonight. But moving onward, if you are joining us for the first time and you'd like to know a little bit more about the Morris-Jumel Mansion, never fear, I have some info for you right now. The Morris-Jumel Mansion is celebrating 260 years this year. It's a big birthday year for us. And if you haven't seen our anniversary exhibition, come on down to the mansion to take a look at that. It's very, very cool. But the mansion was built in 1765, and it's the oldest remaining house in Manhattan. It was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1966. It was designated as an individual landmark in 1967 and an interior landmark in 1975 by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. It is built on the ancestral land of the Lenape people and was likely built and funded using enslaved labor. It served as George Washington's headquarters in the fall of 1776 and also housed Eliza Jumel, former Vice President Aaron Burr, Anne Northup, the wife of Solomon Northup, who wrote his memoir, 12 Years a Slave, and so many more really awesome and amazing people throughout the years. The mansion became a museum in 1904, and in honor of October and the spooky season that we're in right now leading up to Halloween, and what some people know us best for, it is thought to be one of the most haunted places in New York City, and depending on who you ask, in New York State, sometimes in the country. Pretty great stuff. Pretty big shoes to fill. But just a few housekeeping updates before we get into tonight's programming features. On October 25th, we have Viva La Vida, which is in partnership with the Sugar Hill Children's Museum and Northern Manhattan Arts Alliance, where Andrea Arroyo, who's a local uptown artist and a great friend of the mansion, will be building her annual ofrenda and co-creating that with the community. There's also going to be a performance in tandem with an active art installation with Andrea with Marjorie Elliott. And then November 8th, we have Family and Community Day once again, which is free. Come on down if you're in the area. On November 19th, we have another Connect260 where we slide back into the groove of our chronological order of the 260th anniversary exhibition with the Art of Sankofa. And then just a final little bit, our paranormal historical investigations are back. And I don't know how many are left for each ticket sort of selection on these dates, but on the 17th, 18th, 24th, 25th, the 31st, and the 1st, we have paranormal investigations. The one on the 31st is going to be particularly fun. We had to go all out for Halloween. So come on down if you're available. And now moving on to the sort of function of the lecture tonight. This is going to have a portion where you can submit questions to be answered during the Q&A portion of the evening. So make sure you utilize the Q&A feature of the webinar to submit those questions so I could see them and read them out at the end once we open up the floor. And have your voice heard and get those questions answered. And now, without further ado, I am very happy and proud to announce introduce Robert Cozzolino. And I'll just read a little bit about you, Robert, to start us off. Robert Cozzolino is an independent curator, art historian, and critic based in Minneapolis. He curates collaboratively in partnership with artists, colleagues, and broad communities. He's the editor of Supernatural America, The Paranormal in American Art, which explores the numerous ways American artists have made sense of their own experiences of the paranormal and the supernatural, developing a rich visual culture of the intangible. And without further ado, I turn it over to you, and I'm going to go behind my screen for now and pop back up for Q&A. I think you're muted.
There we go. You can see and hear me?
We are set to go now.
Excellent. All right. Thank you so much, Danielle, and thanks for inviting me to participate in this program. Next time I'm in New York, I'm going to have to go there. I've never actually been to the mansion. So I really appreciate being invited to do this. So I am going to give you a bit of a tour of the kinds of ways that artists have translated their experiences of the paranormal and the supernatural in their artwork. And I'm going to start with Gertrude Abercrombie. Gertrude Abercrombie is an artist who's currently having a big show that's touring. It's at Colby College right now, so you may have heard something about her. And she lived and worked in Chicago and was born in 1909 and lived to 1977. This is a painting on the screen by her called Strange Shadows from 1950 or 51. And Gertrude lived in a Victorian home in the Hyde Park neighborhood of Chicago on the South Side. And she had, throughout her life, lots of experiences with spirits and clairvoyance and extrasensory perception and other kinds of things that people might consider paranormal or supernatural. When an interviewer pressed her about whether her home was haunted in a 1960s interview, she said, "Sure, there are plenty of poltergeists here. Sometimes they play piano or the bass. I thought at first it was just hallucinations, but the kid who stays here on and off heard them too. I gave him hell one morning for playing the bass the previous night and keeping me awake. He told me he thought I was playing. Then we remembered that Israel Crosby had just died. I guess Israel had decided to come through and give us a little concert." So Israel Crosby was a bass player and a jazz musician, and Gertrude not only was immersed in this kind of culture of the supernatural, but also the jazz world. And Israel Crosby had died, and Gertrude thought that he had visited her many times in her house and performed on instruments laying around, and she could hear them in the night. She also, in her archives, also constantly had firsthand tales of the paranormal that she wrote down and conveyed. One time she was in a graveyard with her friend Norman McLeish, who is an artist and the brother of poet Archibald McLeish, and they saw mist over graves and decided to investigate. She said they stopped and entered the cemetery and, quote, "Suddenly we saw a big red ball bouncing toward us. First we thought it was a man with a lantern, but it just wasn't. At last we got so frightened we ran like crazy. I think it was a will-o'-the-wisp or perhaps swamp fire. Maybe it was a demonic presence trying to keep us out. The next night it was not there." And she also saw magical undercurrents in the everyday, the juxtaposition of real things with their painted counterparts. And so one time she explained to somebody the work of her seeing these things as clairvoyant. She said, "The strange thing is, once I paint something, it usually turns up in real life. For example, a marble top counter that I painted. It popped up in a painting that I did, and then a few weeks later, I saw it in a shoemaker's shop, so naturally she had to sell it to me. After all, I had painted it." So often she would use her own body and put herself in these positions of levitating, meditating, going into another dimension, revealing a split self. And this was integral to her life and career. There's Gertrude in her house. And Gertrude was one of a whole bunch of Chicago artists who uh, emerged in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, for whom the paranormal and the supernatural were integral to their lives and work, and the way they thought about um, how they went through life, how they interacted with culture, how they interacted with music, literature, and the arts, and wanted to make tangible the things that they were experiencing and feeling were real in their bodies and that they were seeing in the world, whether they thought they would be believed or not. They wanted to make it tangible and depict it in their work. So you have on this screen just a few of those artists who emerged from Chicago at this time. Gertrude Abercrombie, Julia Tekla on the upper right, Messina Barton on the lower right, and on the lower left, Dorothea Tanning, probably best known for exhibiting with the Surrealists, but she started her career in Chicago. All of them really fascinated with the relationship between dreams and trance states and tapping into the unconscious in doing work that would be considered automatist, working without any kind of thought or direction, but taking a kind of dictation from the astral plane or from the spirit world, and taking this very seriously as a source of creativity and a meaningful subject matter. It's something that thrived in Chicago. And there are lots of reasons for that. But I also was born and raised in Chicago. There I am, born on Halloween. And so throughout my entire life, I have been somebody who has thought of the supernatural as natural and the paranormal as normal, and that it was part of the wonder and the curiosity about the world that I was always experiencing from an early age. Um, I did my dissertation on an artist named Ivan Albright, whose two of his paintings are shown here, also who emerged from Chicago and had his critical experiences as an artist there, training there. And I'll talk about another critical sort of training ground for him in a moment. But on the left, you see a painting called That Which I Should Have Done, I Did Not Do, which he painted over 10 years between 1931 and 1941, and a painting on the right called The Vermonter, or it has another title, which is If Life Were Life, There Would Be No Death. And when I was writing on this work and taking Albright as a subject, what I wanted to try to express is what I saw in these things, which is that before, the popular wisdom when people would write about Albright's work is that it was about death and decay and it was morbid. But there was something else that I felt, especially standing in front of the work in person, was present, which was a kind of energy, a growth, an organic sort of writhing experience of the work, twisting and seeming to move in space, and otherworldly qualities that were in there that weren't just about making something look real and tangible, but were about pulling out something that was under the surface, something that had to do with souls and spirits and things like that. And so when I started working on him, I went to his notebooks and I went to his early experiences. And it turns out that Ivan Albright's formative experience was serving in the American Expeditionary Forces in World War One. There he is on the left with his twin brother Malvin before they went off. And Albright spent his entire time in France at a base hospital. These are some photographs that he took during that time. And that's the photograph of the fracture ward and the surgical ward that he was serving in. And when surgeons realized that he could draw, they had him draw wounds, and not only wounds in their treatment, as you see here in these sketchbooks that he kept during World War One, but also X-rays. And more importantly, he also traced the healing process, the body knitting flesh back together and healing itself and closing up wounds and coming back from catastrophic traumatic injuries. And that's the thing that I think was really essential for him is during that experience, he, was in these wards and talking to people that were his own age who had been on the battlefield, and sometimes talking to them as they were breathing their last breaths and experiencing death. But what he took away from that was that inside the body, there's something that is intangible, that is more powerful than the flesh that surrounds it. And that's what he sought to depict the entire time he was making art. In this painting, for instance, which is a portrait of a neighbor, um, he fills it with all these chromatic halos and images of spheres and lights and translucent discs of color to show the life force kind of emanating out of this person who is at the end of his life. And so Albright was somebody who tried all the time to show that there is this intangible life force within the body that accounts for so much of what we call consciousness and perception and awareness that you can't see but is in there. And then it's sort of in this flesh. And he tried to show both of them simultaneously. So later on, as I was thinking about how I kept encountering artists who were interested in this subject, I was able to do an exhibition, as was mentioned earlier, in 2021 called Supernatural America, the Paranormal in American Art. And it included, one of the things I had to do is think about, well, what's the iconography of this stuff? How are artists in the United States thinking about the subject matter? How are they depicting it? And I could think of things in the 19th century, like this John Kedar painting depicting Washington Irving's 1820, a scene from his story of Ichabod Crane being chased by the headless horseman, or a Martin Johnson Heade painting, also from the 19th century, showing a gremlin in Heade's studio, this playful trompe l'oeil painting showing the kind of landscape that he was known for, but it's sitting on these two logs or sawhorses as though it's his easel propped up. And then there's a little gremlin who seems to have actually punctured, literally, the painting, and water is coming out of it. Or a William Rimmer painting, still very mysterious, that hasn't really been unpacked fully, called uh, Flight and Pursuit from 1872, where there's a transparent figure in the background, and there's this ominous shadow chasing this person through a temple. And of course, Albert Pinkham Ryder's The Racetrack, a painting from the late 19th century into the early 20th. I knew about these things, but when I really got down to it, what I wound up focusing on was not so much illustrations of stories or tales, but uh, work by people who identified as experiencers, people who felt that they had paranormal and supernatural experiences in their lives, whether it was ghosts or communicating with extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings. They really felt that this was real and it was central to their experience as human beings, and it was essential to their spirituality. So I started to put together a show that was based on that, the point of view of people who had these experiences or claimed to have had them. So it meant visiting a lot of artists in person, like Betty Saar in the upper left, and doing research in archives for people who are no longer with us, like Ayanel Tampozan on the bottom left, and thinking as broadly as possible in a national view. So, people from all different parts of the country, including here in my backyard. On the right, this is a painting by Choling Taha, who's a First Nations Cree artist who's based in Anoka, Minnesota. And this is a painting from 2017 called Healing, and it shows an entity that visited her while she was on a ceremony, and kept following her around and had a message about the environment and about stewardship and ecology. And she heeded this entity's sort of message and decided to depict it in this image that is about healing and about the world and how we're all interconnected. So, looking then for these specific images that had to do with experience or showed the experience of contact with the otherworldly, a will to make contact with those in spirit, or things that are outside of ourselves and seem to sort of bring with them the mysteries of the universe, things that cannot really be explained in any particular way, but feel like they've really happened. So images that I mean when I'm talking about this is in contrast to things like the Ichabod Crane painting, would be this image, this miniature from 1789 that was in the exhibition. It's only an inch high. That is also a reliquary in a way because it contains some of a 19-year-old woman's hair. And it breaks with these other mourning images because it actually shows contact between the woman in spirit and her mother at the grave mourning. So the spirit of this dead woman is coming out of the obelisk and making contact. They make eye contact, which you could see if you were to see it in person. And there's a relationship happening between the living and the dead that's tangible, that's happening right there between the two of them. That's the kind of imagery that I was looking for and interested in. That's that tradition. So it included things like that 1 inch high miniature, but also a room that was 17 by 12 feet by Whitfield Lavelle, contemporary artist, made in 2001, called the Richmond Project. And this was called Visitation, which evoked the people who had lived in a historically black ward of Richmond, Virginia. It had music, it had smells like tobacco and other things evoking people in this particular room. And then he drew in charcoal these beautiful portraits of people on the walls that felt like they were presences that were visiting and hovering at the edges of our own time. And we could sort of bear witness to them having been there, living these lives and being prosperous at the beginning of the 20th century. So those were the kinds of things that I included. Um, and I knew that I would need to have sustained collaborative work with lots of different communities. So, living artists was one of them, but also uh, people study this, histories of religion, humanities, and also the spiritualist community, practitioners who are around today for whom this is. Not flights of fancy or a hobby, but it is really serious and central to their spiritual practice. So that meant going to Morris Pratt Institute on the bottom right outside of Milwaukee, Lilydale, and Camp Chesterfield, which are spiritualist communities that are still um, up and running and serve the spiritualist community, which goes back to the late 19th century. Um, and consulting with mediums and getting their take on certain things so that I had things culturally sort of correct. So, and also going to them and getting readings and sort of understanding sort of how this all operates. So I had a lot of people who helped me with this and brought different perspectives to it. When I did go to Lilydale, and this is an image of the healing temple from Lilydale, one of the things that really snapped into perspective about the threads of this exhibition that included things, as I said, from the 1780s to the present. And it was arranged not chronologically, but thematically. So each section of the show had work from the 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st century speaking back and forth to one another across time, across generations about similar kinds of ideas, whether it was about mourning or it was about how to depict an apparition or making objects that were to attract or honor a spirit, something like that. So when I was in Lilydale, I, had lots of different experiences there, but one of the things that really brought what was meaningful about this subject home to me, one of the common threads, is that people who are going to visit mediums and going to Lilydale to have these experiences of these workshops and things like that is that they're in mourning. They are going there because they really want to make contact with the loved ones that they have that are in spirit. Have some kind of closure, have some kind of way to reassure them that people who have gone to wherever they've gone outside their bodies, left the earth, are okay. And to make amends or to make some kind of really bring, I guess, like I'm saying, bring closure. So the healing temple outside, if you see on the right side, there's all these ribbons that are hung on a tree. And that is a place where, since the 1870s, people have written on these ribbons those in spirit that they want to remember or honor or keep close to themselves, and also to put out prayers, whatever denomination or religion you belong to, to the dead so that they can hear it and understand that those living are still thinking about them and honoring them and keeping them close. And so I participated in that. I wrote people's names on it, but that was really moving to me. And it really showed me that one of the bigger contexts for all of this is this idea of the will to make contact with loved ones in spirit, but also the spirit realm in general, in order to gain insight, to understand something bigger and outside of yourselves. And so there is this tradition throughout art of the United States, specifically, which I was looking at, showing this and showing that context. And you can imagine in instances like the immense loss of life and sudden death that happened on the battlefield in the Civil War, which is what is depicted on the left side in Emanuel Leutze's painting Angel on the Battlefield from 1864. What you have here swirling around this angel who is writing names in a book is the souls, I think, of the dead on the battlefield, which are manifesting as these sort of featureless children that are swirling around the angel and then eventually are going to dissipate into this cloudy, smoky area up at the top. And that's one way of sort of imagining that. And then it's interesting to me that during World War I, right after World War I, somebody who was a sergeant in the American Expeditionary Forces, an artist named Claggett Wilson, also independently, not knowing this image of Emanuel Leutze's, depicted this image on the right of the saviors of France. Claggett Wilson is fighting in France on the Western Front. So you have Joan of Arc, St. Louis, and Clovis, who are all sort of rising up and perhaps helping with the souls of the dead on the battlefield, and then the hands of the common soldier rising up as well. And so these are ways of trying to imagine this idea of an immense catastrophic loss of life, and also to think about what did the dead need, and what do we need as survivors in order to understand the bigger meaning of this, and also what kind of a place that they've gone to, and to think about whether or not there's a way to contact them, and whether they're around us and surrounding us. So that's really the context that I put images like these, mumbler spirit photographs and spirit photographs by other practitioners in the exhibition, was in this culture of loss and mourning. So works like this photo album that was loaned by the artist Tony Osler, that has all sorts of spirit photographs and other things pertaining to dead and deceased members of a family. It's a memorial object. It's kind of it's a sacred book to this particular family. But it has spirit photographs in it. And spirit photographs in this context are really these icons of mourning, and icons that kind of give uh, a kind of feeling of the feeling that the dead are still present somehow, that we haven't lost touch with them, or we're not going to forget them. And I think that's really the social function of these things. Instead of thinking about whether these are done through trickery or whatever the technical kinds of ways of doing the spirit photographs are done, I think the most important thing is the social function and the use of them, and the way of them being ways of imagining those loved ones in spirit and having them visualized as being around us. So you can think of that as more of the context for that. And as I sort of was developing this exhibition, one of the things that kept coming up was, why the United States? Is there something about the history of the United States that is particularly conducive to thinking through its visual art history as one of a spectral art history, one that's haunted? And what kept coming up in my mind was this image by John Gast called American Progress from 1872, which was really a kind of propaganda image for Manifest Destiny. You have this allegorical figure who's moving from east to west, laying the telegraph, bringing with it with her the train, clearing out non-human creatures like the bison and and making it less wild and also chasing out indigenous people. And so this kept coming up in my mind. And I also thought, as I was thinking about that, I would involuntarily have this image of her as the angel of death, sowing seeds of death and in her wake as a manifestation of violent colonialism and an attempted genocide. So somebody drew my attention to the fact that an indigenous artist named John Hotelanos, who lives and works in California, had actually been commissioned by the Denver Art Museum in 2017 of making a video. So this is a still from a video called Destiny's Manifest, where he takes that John Gast image and he animates it and he actually makes it into this thing that I kept thinking about and turning it into in my own head. So John wound up being one of the consultants for the show and also wrote an essay about this piece and why he had made it in the catalog. And it's what the first thing that people saw before they went into the galleries. So that kind of framework where ghosts come back in ghost stories over and over again, whether it's at the mansion or it's in other places that you probably think about when you think about places that you think are haunted or have felt a presence in. Ghosts represent things that are unsettled, um, ideas and concepts and people or events that have not had any kind of closure around them that demand to be reckoned with, something that's hidden and concealed that has to be brought to light in order for it to be resolved before we can move on and heal ourselves as a culture, as people, as individuals. And so that kind of metaphor, which is also real to a lot of people, that there really are ghosts and spirits and hauntings and a feeling when you're in a place that it's charged with something from its history. There's layers. That seemed also to be one of the most potent ways of thinking about what this content would mean and how to arrange the show. Other examples of that are in the artist Jack Whitten. Some of you may have seen the Jack Whitten exhibition that was at the Museum of Modern Art. Um, was it last year? This is Jack Whitten was constantly interested and engaged in the idea of memorializing people who passed that were really important to him, whether it was Art Blakey, the drummer, or Malcolm X in this case. This is an homage to Malcolm X that was made the year that Malcolm X was assassinated. And so, and it's designed in a way to look like one of a Congo power figure, having all these nails and things driven into it, and then being this strong, powerful arm at the same time. Um, and Witten told a story more than once about how when he was a kid and he would be traveling with his father to visit his father's family in the South from one area to another, um, uh, from South Carolina to Alabama, that they would pass through this town and see this courthouse. And a lot of the locals would say to them, tell them the story about a man named Henry Wells, who had been a freedman and in 1878 was arrested and accused, probably falsely accused, of burning down a building. And he was held in this courthouse in the upper story. In this image, you can see there's a little arrow that points to where he was held. And the story is that the young Jack Whitten heard is that there was a storm gathering and there was a mob outside this building. And all of a sudden, lightning struck the building. And Henry Wells was looking out of that upper window. And when lightning struck the building, Henry backed away. Everybody was startled. And his visage, his image, was etched onto the glass. And every time they replaced the panes of glass, it came back over and over and over again. Now, whether you believe that literally happened over and over again, people who are locals in the town held on to that story and talked about it over and over again as a recurring image, a recurring apparition. Um, kind of a manifestation of this trauma that had happened there. And um, Witten had thought about that when later on, when he was trying to make sense of his first real experimental paintings that he was doing in the early 60s. This is around 1964 or so, that he later termed ghost paintings. There are paintings that were done in just tones of gray and white and black, um, where he would put paint on a sort of on a surface, and then he would put a mesh over that, and then scrape the paint away, and then pull the mesh up, and these very strange, mysterious um, traces that weren't fully formed images, but felt like something was emerging and coming forth and pressing itself against the surface. These are images that he later connected back to that impression that was made on him as a kid of Henry Wells looking out that window, surrounded by these people that wanted to do him harm and feeling all of the charged emotion of that. And Whitten really felt like this was that kind of coming back or a kind of intergenerational trauma emerging through these paintings. And the image that is central to all of this are these tremulous, spectral, indeterminate images that feel like they represent some kind of haunting. And that was critical to how he was thinking about the time, too, because he was also experiencing the civil rights movement and protesting and experiencing the intense violence that was being perpetrated against people who were fighting for the right thing. So all of this coalesced in these images at that time. Um, and so these remained a way that Whitten really thought about how imagery could be conveyed. Um, what was in his mind, his thoughts could be transferred to canvas and connected to the viewer. So, you know, the way that I started to also look at, you know, how artists were coming up in iconography of the supernatural, aside from those images that were, you know, illustrations of tales, is how do you depict things that are intangible? How do you make how do you make visible things that are experiences or things that might not be believable to other people that you have witnessed? And so, one example of that is how Henry Asawa Tanner, in about 1907, broke with tradition by showing an image of the miraculous on the Sea of Galilee, in this image of the disciples watching Jesus walk on water. Jesus, as you'll note here, is remarkably not a body, not flesh and blood and bone anymore, but is spirit. And I think that was a way that Tanner was trying to show to people um, and express what could be seen as miraculous and evocative of a spirit realm of being not quite, being divine and not just being earthbound. And so that's how he often, over and over again, really rethought how religious iconography in a Christian sense could be depicted by bringing forth visual analogies to spirit. So here, Jesus is basically just this kind of shroud or smudge of white hovering above the sea, and the heavens, which we don't see in the upward reaches of this picture, are imprinted in touching the sea, as though everything is opening up and a dimension is sort of emerging that shows the disciples that this person that they're following truly is of another otherworldly realm. Other ways that artists, had expressed different apparitions connected to things that they feel like they saw. Dorothea Tanning, showing these spectral, spooky figures at doors that are opening up, which seem to be connected not only to dreams and hallucinations, but also her experience of seeing ghosts and hearing specters in houses that she lived in. Two paintings from 1952 and 51. Morris Cantor in 1930 on the left, depicting a haunted house by having the inside and outside of this building interpenetrated. So the outside is coming in as though sounds and walls are dissolving, and then this figure, this menacing figure in the shape of a human being, but also bringing the outside in, or maybe the history of the place inside. All has to do with the disorientation of experience that might happen when you're experiencing a haunting. On the right, you see a Helen Lundberg painting from 1935 called Double Portrait of the Artist in Time. So it's a self portrait, really three times. It's her as a child depicted from a photograph, and then her in a painting that she had actually made around the same time, and then both are connected by this long shadow that seems to um, maybe represent something intangible, her soul, her consciousness, some shadow self, connecting the two places. Charles Birchfield, making this painting in 1917 of a rainy day with church bells ringing and a cold December morning, had a whole vocabulary of abstract images for conventions of thought and feeling and expression that he worked into the form and content of his pictures. And so, again, like with that Morris Cantor, this is a way of showing a kind of extrasensory experience of fear and terror and having the spirits and things that are changing the very fiber of the place that you're in through haunting expressed in this way. This is a painting by Marvin Cohn, who is active in Iowa, named called The Appointed Room from 1940. And when this was exhibited, a critic said about this and other haunted house images that Marvin Cohn had depicted, who loved to go search around in abandoned buildings and things like that, looking for feeling like he wanted to see whether there were specters and things inside them. He loved the feeling of being in old houses and especially abandoned houses. And that's where he got a lot of his subject matter from. A critic said, this is one of the most effective paintings that he had made in this mode because you can almost hear the doors creaking and the chains clanking upstairs and in the basement. Though there are no chains or even ghosts in the painting, there's nothing there but an abandoned house. But somehow Cohn evokes the feeling of what it would be like to be in that space and to feel like you're being watched or that something's about to emerge. Other examples of the ways that artists were thinking about how to depict the intangible are paintings on the left by Messina Barton and a drawing by Winnell Reese, sort of showing auras, the sort of psychic double inside of the body, manifest as colors and as swells of form and shape. And artists like Agnes Pelton, not depicting something in a realist manner, but going right to an abstract sensation of an overflowing feeling of warmth and sensation and a changing emotion in the body based on a meditative image that was based on a yogic practice that she was devoted to. But this painting, White Light, White Fire, from 1930, was an image that she felt could, by staring at and sort of meditating on, bring you to another state of consciousness. Also, Henrietta Reese, depicting other kinds of um, depicting her experience of synesthesia. On the left, it's her listening to music and trying to depict the spontaneous images that came forth while she was listening to music. And on the right, scent. That's scent of violets that she tried to depict to show what she experienced, these two simultaneous senses, one coming to her without any kind of voluntary effort, while she was smelling something, the smell of violets, these colors would sort of be in front of her as though they were real and she could reach out and touch them. So she wanted to convey them to the viewer. And one aspect of the show that was important was that there was works not only like this, but um, this is a piece by Barbara Bullock, who's based in Philadelphia and is in her mid 80s now. called Guardian Spirit Altar. It's a piece that she started in the 70s and is additive and is part of her own spiritual practice. It's something that has, an armature underneath it that's wood, but then she's overlaid it with raffia and fiber and fabric and beaded strings and other kinds of things that she's added over and over and over again as offerings to spirits, offering to ancestors. And every time she shows it, there's a protocol around how you arrange it and how you handle it because it is supposed to be a sacred vessel, and it is something that is not only honoring spirits but has spirit contained inside of it, but also has offering bowls and things that people are welcome to put things in. Um, but also, when it comes back to her studio, she asks it, does it want something else added to it? And then she will add to it. So it's part of a living practice of spirituality that is embedded in the sculpture. So there were a lot of examples of things like this where this is a sculpture, but it's also an altar. It's also a kind of receptacle for spirit. It's part of a spiritualist practice. So it's all of those things contained and concentrated in one. Uh, this is a piece by Renee Stout that is honoring root workers and people who make spells and potions, but also tinctures and other kinds of things that serve a spiritual need in different communities, often in the back rooms of botanicas, offering advice, but also offering combinations of herbs and things that not only heal, but also might be for particular kinds of outcomes. And all of this, this is hand built by Renee Stout, but also these jars are blown glass, and then also found glass that she arranges here and then sets on this table that's lit up, and the chalkboard on the back that purports to be this list of things that this root worker would be compiling uh, is actually it's oil paint and then it's oil stick. And so it's made to mimic chalk, and then she manipulates it to seem like it's a chalkboard. So I want to end on talking about the kinds of work that artists were doing in the United States in the early 20th century who were spiritualists, were part of the spiritualist religion. They weren't working in the art world. They weren't showing at art galleries or commercial spaces or museums, except in very unusual, rare instances. One or two of them did. But their context was working in ceremony at seances, um, channeling spirits, having no artistic training whatsoever, but finding that making visual art or doing automatic writing by having a spirit enter their bodies and control their hands was part of a sacred practice that provided messages for people who are present with them at these seances. We have to go back to just briefly outline the history of spiritualism, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but I just wanted you to get the broad strokes. In 1848, Maggie and Kate Fox, who you see here, said that they had heard rapping in their Hydesville, New York house, and realized that they could communicate back and forth with this entity that was rapping that they thought was the ghost of a dead peddler who had died years before. Later, it was found that there were bones in a box of things buried in the walls of this house. But their news and their demonstration that they could do this wound up exceeding their local situation and spreading like wildfire throughout the United States. Lots of other people had before them, in different contexts, said that they could contact and talk to the spirit world and had different ways of doing that. But when the Fox sisters had done it and started demonstrating it in lecture circuits and to big audiences, it really kind of exploded. So it didn't begin with them. There were always people who had said that they could channel spirits or talk to the spirit world across cultures, but this made it a very popular, specific kind of religion that was anti-hierarchical. So there's no bishop or pope or rabbi. It said that the way to talk to the spirit world and communicate with the dead really resides solely with individuals who could cultivate the talent It's all within all of us, and we can just sort of open up and realize that we can have that experience. So there was a craze for seances and all sorts of things. And I just want you to understand that that's not specifically something that happens in the 19th century. It continues to the present moment. That's an etching that was an image that was published, a print of a seance with a medium at the center, on the back of the table, with all sorts of things happening, including a spirit hand that's doing automatic writing. But then there's a photograph by the contemporary photographer Shannon Taggart, who is based here now, who's been documenting around the world spiritist and spiritualist communities who persist and are practicing these things in the 21st century. So I consulted with different mediums for this and learned a lot about what this means today. That's Susan Barnes in the center in her house. Um, and I wanted you to know that, during the 19th century, there were a lot of mainstream American artists who you may be familiar with who were practicing spiritualists or who were practicing mediumship. So William Sidney Mount, whose painting on the left you see here from 1828, um, Saul and the Witch of Endor, was doing spirit art. He was channeling spirits and making spirit drawings, but he was also going constantly to hear mediums give messages in public arenas, in theaters. And there's a drawing of him by him of a very well-known medium from the mid 19th century that he saw over at least a couple times and made drawings of, and really admired and wanted to understand what was this connection she had to this other realm. Harriet Hosmer, who is an extremely important sculptor from the mid 19th century, was a clairvoyant, had ghost experiences, and this image of Medusa carved in marble that she made in the 1850s was in the exhibition as a sort of powerful figure who had supernatural abilities and also was a powerful woman, a powerful female figure. And that's an important aspect of spiritualism that I'll mention in a moment. That it was really a religion that that privileged women's voices and gave women in the 19th century a role in public life that they didn't have otherwise, and gave them these power positions where they could speak forcefully and authoritatively about spiritual matters. And that was one way that spiritualism was helping to sort of connect to an emerging feminist movement. This is a Whistler painting of Lady Archibald Campbell, who was a writer about the occult and had a seance circle. And when this portrait, full-length portrait, was exhibited in the 1870s, people did pick up that it was speaking a kind of language of the seance, of the darkened room and of apparitions emerging from it. And so it was an appropriate mode for Whistler to depict this subject. Spiritualism sort of dictated deeds, not creeds. Don't say what you're going to do or say that you're adhering to a particular set of moral values, but actually put them into practice. It attracted reformers and early feminists like Victoria Woodhull, who ran for president with Frederick Douglass as her running mate, and Harriet Tubman, in her later life, retired to a spiritualist community in Brattleboro, Michigan. So it was, an imperfect, because people are involved, system of thought, but at its best. And what it did when it was at its best, it was a reform movement that was advocating for abolition. It was advocating for women's rights. Here's a group of suffragists who are meeting at Lilydale with Marion Skidmore in the center, announcing that Wyoming and Colorado had had major wins for the suffragettes. And into the 1920s, it's a religion that is having conventions that are mixed and they're interracial. So, there are there are mediums who are Black and mediums who are from all different sort of backgrounds who are advertising and meeting together in an integrated way. These are just spreads from a convention manual that came out in 1922 when the spiritualists met in Chicago, just to show you that. So You may have heard or seen the Hilma Klimt show at the Guggenheim or heard about Georgiana Houghton or Emma Kuntz. These are women spiritualist practitioners who are spirit artists who are active in Europe in the early 20th century. So, they're best known, I think, popularly for doing these abstract images as they're channeling and doing things in trance. So I wanted to know, well, what do the Americans look like when you're looking at people who are not artists? But channelers at spiritualist camps doing this in a sacred setting, what does it look like? So these are some of the things that I found um, to finish with. This is a work by a woman named Lizzie Connor, who, again, was not trained, but started spontaneously making images during seances when people in the seance circle at Camp Chesterfield, Indiana, spiritualist camp, were trying to contact a dead young woman, Ida Brandenburg, who was connected to one of the founders of the camp. And she started to shake with somebody gave her a pencil and she started to draw this image spontaneously with these flowers around her and an image that apparently looked remarkably like her, bringing forth an image of her at peace in the afterlife. Um, One of the more unusual manifestations of this kind of power was the Bang sisters, um, who did something that only another couple, the Campbell brothers, had ever done, which is make these images called precipitated spirit paintings, which were done without the intervention of a human hand. So allegedly, the way a work like this was made, which is that the Bang sisters would make a portrait. They made a portrait for this man, Dr. Doherty, and his wife and children were all dead. They were in spirit. And so they made this portrait of him because he hoped that they would be able to manifest images of them on the canvas by channeling their spirits and having them come forth and precipitate almost like droplets of pigment on the surface of this image without them touching it. And so there are lots of uh, the testimonials in newspapers around this time of people seeing the Bang sisters make an image of somebody who's in life and then put the paper on or a canvas in a box or face down on a surface and then put their hands on it and channel and have a message come forth and then flip it over and miraculously these other images are on it who the Bang sisters would say are the spirits making these images come manifest, almost like they're developing. Um, so in this case, the story attached to this at Camp Chesterfield is that he wanted a double portrait with his dead wife, Lizzie, and she came forth. And then the Bang sisters heard a voice say, "Why can't the twins come?" And they asked the man about that, and he said, "Yeah, I had twin daughters who are dead." And so they put this painting down on the surface of this table, and then again channeled the spirits of these two daughters. And then when they revealed the painting, their images had come forth. That's the story attached to it. But again, like spirit photographs, this is a way of people coming to these mediums and trying to connect with the dead and trying to express how they feel about their loved ones who are in spirit. And here's just a detail of that. Finally, there's other mediums who were making images by channeling a spirit and having it be a kind of educational experience about what happens during mediumship, trying to demystify what happens and what's the point of mediumship, what it feels like in the body when a medium is channeling. So there's images that she made through channeling of automatic writing, or transfiguration when the spirit comes into the body of a medium and then you can see it sort of superimposed, clairaudience, and clairvoyance and healing. So these are remarkable images all done in watercolor by this woman that purport to show what happens in mediumship. Frances Haynes McVeigh was somebody who was formally trained, but then worked as a medium at Camp Chesterfield and did these automatic drawings and paintings. She said that the spirit that was guiding her hand was that of William Blake. And these are peculiar instances where these are drawings that she said the line is basically her hand being controlled by the spirit, going down on the paper, and she's in trance while she's doing this. And what the line of the drawing is showing is it's tracing the path of a soul as it leaves a body somewhere and moves around until it meets its destination. And then at the bottom is automatic writing that's all connected, that is all signed by William Blake and also describes what she's just drawn. So I'll just read you one of these. It says, for instance, William Blake Spirit, this is a soul in heaven's doorway trying to get in. It is a very little soul, and the way is very difficult. Yes, on the left, as though William Blake is telling Frances Haynes McVey while she's drawing where to look, where this soul is that he's identifying. The last artist I'll tell you about is Agatha Wojciechowski, who was a healer and at one point was told by spirits to buy art supplies and start making drawings and paintings. She made notebooks of automatic drawings that or automatic writing that look like this, that apparently she could decipher and tell you what it meant. There's pages and pages and pages of this. Sometimes it's in these indecipherable to us characters. Sometimes it's in German. Sometimes it's in English. That's her spirit trumpet on the left that she could put up to her ear and hear the voices of spirits. And that's her from a still in a video that one of her students took of her working in trance and making a spirit image. Here's just two examples of the kind of work that she did. And she was the rare instance of someone who was working in this spiritual, sacred context, but was invited to show at an art gallery in the late 60s. And so was integrated into some exhibitions of art. But she had no contact really with the art world and was probably a little baffled by that interest because she wasn't trained in what she was really doing. At every single instance, as she said, she worked from the bottom to the top in trance and was bringing forth landscapes and images and visions of the spirit world and the spirit realm, which is why you see these little images of the spirits coming forth in these chromatic landscapes. So that is all I have to share. That's the range of different kinds of things that I had included and ways that artists have connected to the supernatural and made it manifest in their imagery. And I'd welcome any questions that people have or comments.
Thank you so much, Robert. So yeah, like Robert was saying, go ahead and pop your questions into the chat or the Q&A feature. Sorry, folks. But one that I have is based off of a story from the early 1800s where Eliza Jamel received a discount when she was purchasing the Morris-Jumel mansion due to its supposed haunting. Was this a common 1800s in the 19th century, or was this was she ahead of the curve on this?
That she was living in a haunted house?
That she even felt
Yeah, I think.
so strongly to say it and get that
Oh,
discount.
yeah. I mean, I think that ever since we've become conscious of our own mortality, there's always been um, ideas and questions and a consciousness about a spirit world. It's in so much, literature, folk tales, and correspondence, and ways people have thought about our relationship to the other world, the afterlife, whatever you want to call it. And there's probably always been people who feel like they're more in tune with that. Uh, I would be curious to find out if like she left diaries behind or correspondence where she talks about experiencing haunting, or if there's no trace that she sort of really like believed that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's also one of the things that I hope to one day stumble across somewhere
Mhm.
in an archive. Who knows if anyone has it, but her diaries would would be really wonderful to read, especially in terms of the paranormal, because she lived in the house from 1810 to 1865. So if
Right.
anyone's gonna know,
Yeah.
it's her.
Well, that last decade was really, it was a peak moment for spiritualism, in part because of the Civil War. And so I'm sure, it'd be also curious to see if you ever uncover at the mansion that there were seances held there.
Mhm.
I would be surprised if there weren't.
We definitely know that later with Hans Holzer, there were seances and sort of his style of investigation.
Hmm.
So I'm not quite in Eliza's time, but I would love to find that out as well.
Yeah.
Um, anyone else have any questions? Go ahead and pop them into the chat. Um, another question that we had for you is when someone is channeling, have they ever described an artist what it's like to channel sort of through artwork to you?
So I have talked to mediums. I showed a picture of Susan Barnes, but in an earlier slide, there was a woman named Reverend Maurice Culverson, who's based in Chicago. They've described what it feels like to channel and when they're giving messages. And in my one of my essays in the book, I talk about that, and it's very much in line with how people in the 19th century would talk about it as well, which is that it's like there's somebody behind them or a presence, not scary, but kind of calming. And sometimes it'll feel for some mediums that their body is kind of like tingling, and that they're, not really aware. It's like they're partly in a dream state and not. As they're bringing forth a message, sometimes they don't remember what they said. It's different from everybody, but in terms of artists, I do know some artists who wouldn't call themselves mediums, but they work in a way that they feel is connected to the spirit realm, or when they're working, again, it sounds like mediumship, but they don't purport to be mediums. um, they'll go into this state where they're not aware of anything else happening and they're not making conscious decisions, and they're just working. Or they're feeling like there's another consciousness that's merging with them, that's somehow working to make the imagery. So, it seems like it's personal, and it's contingent on who the person is, but I've had a lot of people tell me about how they feel it's connected. And I mean, one of the mediums that I talked to, Lauren Thibodeau, who has a PhD in psychology, and she's also a medium at Lilydale, talks about how when she hears people talk about the muse or talk about going into these flow states when they're being creative, she would say, to me, it's basically they're connecting with spirit. That's a different way of saying that they're connecting with a spirit realm, the other world, another dimension, and they're somehow open as a channel, and that's coming through. And so that's another way to kind of think about it, I guess.
That's really interesting. And so while I give folks an opportunity to pop some questions into the Q&A before we wrap up, I do have to ask, since we are the Morris-Jumel Mansion and we do our paranormal investigations, where do you fall on the spectrum of believer to skeptic? And you don't have to answer that if you must stay neutral for the sake for the sake of your work. And what is, if you've had any, what is your sort of best or most head tilting sort of paranormal experience?
Sure. So, I've had several different paranormal experiences that I would say feel like they're ghost experiences or
Mhm.
hauntings. I've never experienced anything having to do with UFOs or aliens. And in my show, I didn't talk about it tonight, but in my show, there was a whole section at the end. There was two galleries that were devoted to what I called plural universes, and there are a lot of people who have UFO experiences, artists who made art about it, even including artists like who are well known, like Howardina Pindell told me about her paranormal experiences. But that I can't really relate to. But when I was a kid, there was a house that was a friend of mine's grandmother's house that he said was haunted, and it was probably about seventh grade, maybe even younger, maybe sixth grade. We were all being kind of goofy and daring one another to go up to the second floor, and I went in and went up to the top of the stairs and looked and saw this like shadow figure coming out of a room and sort of gliding and then going into a closet. And I ran down the stairs and probably skipped four at a time and came out. But I also lived when I was still living in Chicago in my 20s. I lived with a friend and a couple, and one of the people in the couple's mom was a Santeria priestess, and she would come over and throw divining stones and give readings, but also at one point, a friend of mine who is an absolute skeptic saw an entity in the house. This, which he described, was a 6 foot tall, large, featureless person gliding from our living room into my friend Richard's bedroom. And Tony's mom, when she heard about it, she was like, "Jonathan said that," and she knew Jonathan was a very straight laced, like no nonsense, pragmatic skeptic. And he had told me he had witnessed this after like a party that we had. It was just like a gathering where people weren't like, nobody was taking mushrooms or anything like that. It was just a bunch of people getting together. And so he wasn't on anything. And he was pretty freaked out when he told me about it. So I believed him. And she was like, the house has an entity that's been projected by Richard's soon to be ex-wife, and it's getting in the way of things, and the whole house has to be cleansed. And so we had to have this ritual cleansing of the house, which I'm not going to get into what happened. But yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot.
And those are two very good ones. And having someone who's a skeptic, when they call it
Oh
out,
yeah, yeah,
that's when you know. That's when you know
for
something might
sure.
be there. And it's great that you had sort of your own person to help you deal with the
Oh yeah,
mostly
yeah. A
paranormal
whole
on
number of people.
retainer.
Yeah, Tony's mom helped a number of people. One of our friends had an incubus.
Oh goodness.
Yeah, so that's what she thought. That was the spiritual diagnosis. So yeah, it was good to have her around. And sometimes we were like, "Oh no, what's going to happen? What is she going to see next?"
There's
So
always something waiting
yeah,
around the corner.
right.
Hey, the paranormal keeps us all on our toes.
hmm
That's
But
the
I was
great
born on
part.
Halloween, so it was sort of there's
It's
I can't
magnetic.
yeah,
It's a
there's no
pull,
way I could get away from it.
no matter what. Well,
Mhm.
thank you so much, Robert. This has been so much fun. And I'm so glad we got to connect. And you should definitely swing on by the mansion.
I totally will.
Let us know. We'll maybe do a little investigating on our own. And for
Yeah.
folks in the audience, act now or forever hold your peace for this fall's paranormal investigation tickets. They're going pretty quick. But
hmm
yeah, happy fall, everyone. Happy Halloween and spooky season. And thank you again, Robert, for being here with
Yeah.
us.
Thanks for
And
inviting me.
have a
Okay.
great night, everyone.
Bye-bye.